Hi, I'm Chris Myers from Fox Sports. Was at ESPN for 10 years, 20 years plus now at Fox. Everything from Super Bowls to Daytona 500s, NASCAR, World Series. Got to cover a lot of things, interview a lot of interesting people. I worked in local radio and local TV before I got to ESPN and then the Fox Network and FS1. So I've always enjoyed sports and I've always enjoyed interviewing and talking to people. So I'm glad to be on this episode of For the Athlete.
You're listening to For the Athlete, a podcast aimed at humanizing the athlete by giving them a platform to control their own narrative and tell their life stories. As always, here's your host, Brooks Huber.
We're back for season 2 of For the Athlete. I'm your host, Brooks Huber, and this week's guest needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyways. You have heard his voice, you have seen him on TV, he's done it all when it comes to sports broadcasting. Welcome on to the show, current Fox play-by-play commentator, Chris Myers. Chris, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm good, Brooks. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited about our conversation today. Like you mentioned in your introduction, you accomplished so many things in different sports with both ESPN and Fox Sports. We're going to cover all of that in this episode, but I want to start at the beginning. You seemingly knew what you wanted to do with your life at a young age. You started your own radio show at the age of 16 in Miami, where you interviewed sports legends such as Muhammad Ali and Don Shula. What drew you to being a sports broadcaster, and how were you able to secure your own radio show at such a young age?
Yeah, well, I used to call into a radio station sports talk show when I was younger, in between doing homework, and I would disguise my voice so I could get on there earlier. Chris from Miami, and then I'd call back as like Duke from North Miami and try to agree with my earlier calls so that I just could get to talk more sports. I came from a big family, so getting to talk was always difficult, but you learn how to interject. And I always liked, interviewing people and talking to people. I think everybody's got a story, so you combine sports and people, and I think that's really what fascinated me at an early age. And then realizing, okay, there's winning and losing, and there's coaches and players or there's jobs in which you get to talk to those people. I really was never good enough to be an athlete. That really wasn't my dream. I think I appreciated greatness in that area, so it drew me into that field, radio, TV at the time, and by calling into the radio station, that's kind of how I got a part-time job. Just as I was getting my driver's license, my dad had to drive me down there on the weekend to help out behind the scenes, and then because I just was a fanatic about studying sports at that point, in my existence, I would say probably after the second or third grade is when it really clicked in my head, and then up into high school. So they let me fill in on the air, and they said, "Well, you got a deep voice, just keep talking sports." And I didn't make a lot of money, but it was something that I enjoyed doing. And then eventually it helped me get into college, and then into the profession more so, where I got to get paid for doing it, in which I could make a living.
Well, let's talk about your time in college. You went to Florida International University and Miami-Dade Community College, and that was before you secured your big break at ESPN.
Yeah.
What was your path to ESPN like?
What's that?
What was your path? Yeah, well, what path to ESPN like?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Brooks, too, the community college, the junior college, I was already kind of working in radio, and so I didn't have a lot of time to go to like a 4-year school up at the time, but it allowed me to work on some things, and they had good equipment and instructors there to help with the TV part of the business and the writing and the reporting versus just the radio side. And then briefly to FIU, but then I got a TV radio job in Miami, and then I was in New Orleans at the CBS station when ESPN was starting to grow, and they saw a report. I think they saw 2 different stories as a reporter. I was a weekend anchor and then reporter. I did the LSU baseball team going to the College World Series, and then a story on the Saints coaching staff, which at the time they were successful, but none of the coaches on the staff had played in the NFL. And so that kind of got me into ESPN as a West Coast reporter. So I was one of the first it was Jimmy Roberts in New York and myself out in Los Angeles to be kind of full-time ESPN reporters. They were mostly in the studio with the Chris Berman, those kinds of guys, Dan Patrick through the years. And so that's kind of how I got into ESPN, covering stories that they would send me out west, and really even like into Dallas, covering the Cowboys, and into the Midwest and wherever they needed us. And then eventually back into the studio, where I got to work with Mike Tirico, and then helped with Linda Cohn when she got into the business at ESPN, but helped her kind of move up through the ranks. And so that was kind of the ESPN break that I got from working in local television.
Yeah, so how did those conversations even happen? Because you said you were working in Louisiana, and then how do you get those conversations? Be like, hey, I'm going to now jump to ESPN.
Yeah, well, you think when you're at a certain spot, and as people say, well, how could you leave Miami to go to New Orleans? But the TV station in New Orleans at the time, again, a CBS affiliate, but they had the budget for me to go to the Kentucky Derby or to cover the Masters. And for a local sports reporter, I'm going to have to find angles that connected to people from in and around that area. But that was a big deal. I mean, usually you just cover things in your area. Yes, sometimes it's even high school, whether it was LSU or the Saints or that type of thing. So that was part of the move. And then I wanted to kind of say, okay, where do I go from here? Can I get a job in LA? I had interviewed to be a sports anchor in New York. It didn't work out, but an agent then helped me and said, hey, I think we could move you up to a bigger market. But when he heard that ESPN was looking and they saw my tape, he helped make that connection. So that's kind of how that came about.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you got to ESPN, because there you had many memorable moments. You anchored SportsCenter and had your own show on the network called Up Close. And while hosting Up Close, you had the opportunity to speak with many big names in sports, but possibly none bigger than the time you interviewed OJ Simpson after the murder trial. Walk me through how that came about, and what was your biggest challenges that you faced while doing it?
Yeah, well, the challenge was that initially we were going to have him on the show. We talked to, Hall of Famers, current athletes, ex-athletes, and we were planning on it. And then, of course, he gets involved and charged with a double murder and the wrongful death lawsuit. And so after those he was not found guilty in one and then found guilty in the other. But once those were completed, we ended up having the first live interview with him. He wouldn't do a Barbara Walters interview because she had to tape it. Those were his words. And he said he wanted to come on. And I think people thought we were, the challenge in it, to answer your question, was I thought we were going to talk, I think he thought we were going to talk sports, and some people did, but you couldn't do that in that situation, even though he had this terrific playing career. So the challenge was, boy, I have to ask questions that people wanted. That was the trial of the century in terms of a sport, an athlete, in terms of what he was involved with and what took place, and because of the television coverage. So I had to do a lot of research from a legal standpoint and a court standpoint, and I didn't want to judge or play, the judge or jury, but I had to do the homework and ask the questions. And in fairness to him, he said he would do it only if it was live. And so I understood that, because, some people warned me and said, hey, be careful. He knows things better than you, and he'll make you look stupid. But I'm glad that we went ahead and did it on the show, and ESPN had the nerve to go forward with it. So I think people got to see, and that was the goal. You judge for yourself, and you can still watch it. I still get comments and calls. In fact, there'll be a book coming out on that particular, tying that in, not just this interview, but some of the things we did with Up Close and ESPN and even at Fox in the next year. But I think we'll still watch it today, because if you've heard a lot over since the late 90s. But if you look at that on YouTube and watch the live, how he acted, things make sense a little bit about what you heard on the trial, what you heard afterwards, and how he still is in such denial. So that was a little bit out of the box for somebody who always wanted to cover football and baseball and World Series and Super Bowls and that type of thing, to have that opportunity to do it. But I just thought it was important as a reporter, to not pass that up. And I give him credit for coming on and answering the questions, or at least, facing the questions. And I think he did say he wanted to come on because he thought I was fair with other athletes when I had interviewed them on different topics.
Well, yeah, I actually went back and I watched that last week. It was a great interview. And my favorite part about the whole thing is you didn't stand down once. A lot of journalists could have beat around the bush a little bit. You asked him the questions that people wanted to know. And was that your first time you did an interview that wasn't really about sports, but still with like an athlete?
Yeah, that was the challenge. I think the key was being prepared, because people had warned me, and I did have help from attorneys, from prosecutors, from people in the legal system. I actually got to see some evidence that they didn't even allow the jury to see. So I kind of prepared almost as if I was involved in the case, as whether it was a prosecutor or a defense attorney. And I was consumed by it, and like everybody else at the time through that, was very interested in it. And I just, I wanted to call him out on things that just sounded like a lot of BS, and because, he didn't have anything to back it up. Searching for the real killers. Well, how? What? Would it give us some?
And you kind of did do that. You kind of did call him out on that. And I just awesome.
Okay, and there's a hard line there to be respectful of somebody, even if you think. And look, in my honest opinion, and at the time, it wasn't about my opinion. But the research, there's no way he didn't do it. That's how I left this. It's just whether he had some help or who was involved. And so as time goes by, he has to live with that. And everybody else, has formed their own opinion over time. But yes, it was a very unique interview, and based on what your question was, that you're used to talking to guys about winning and losing and strategy and overcoming adversity, and this was totally totally out of the box. It was supposed to be a half-hour interview. I ended up in the process and give the company credit for saying, hey, let's keep rolling with this, and it was, I think, closer to 50 minutes because it was live. And it was so widely watched, widely viewed, widely reacted to.
Yeah, when I rewatched it, I noticed you guys had a couple of commercial breaks where you guys were just sitting there at the table. Did you guys talk at all during those commercial breaks? Was it silent?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, it's a good question. And normally I would chat with a guest. And by the way, he's the only guest in the years that I did that I never shook his hand afterwards. And I think I just said, I thank you for being on. And he said, it was great talking sports with you. I think that's how it ended with, but I'm just like, well, I can't talk about your touchdowns and your career after what we all just witnessed. So, we were straightforward about that. When he was coming on, I said, I got to ask you about these things. And he said, you can ask whatever you want, just don't ask about my children. And I thought that was fair. But he did, in the break, there were a couple of things going on. One, his publicist had come out after the first break and was kind of yelling at me like, well, you shouldn't be asking these things. And OJ Simpson said to her, just okay, I got this. I can handle this. Like, this is no problem. Let me continue. And then he also, believe it or not, at one intense point, and there were a few moments where it was very intense, we hit a break. We're just talking about, some brutal moment. We showed photos of his ex-wife being, I guess there were pictures from a domestic incident that they had. But he turns to me and says something about a tee time that he has, to play golf, and would I be interested in, if I wanted to play golf or something. So it was I was kind of shocked, and was he really there? A total disconnect. So there were those kinds of awkward moments in between the interview. But I was mostly focusing on, what we could cover in the next question. So there wasn't a lot of time, at least from my standpoint, for small chit-chat.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you pride yourself on being great at doing interviews. And this kind of question is kind of a little more for me because I do interviews on here. But what's your process like going into an interview? And how is that different than maybe the OJ Simpson one?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to do interviews. And am I doing a post-game interview with Tom Brady after the Super Bowl, or Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, where I only have 2 or 3 questions, and there's a lot of crowd on the field and noise, and you're being rushed, and how specific am I going to get? You have to celebrate the moment. And then there's the sit down interviews, and that's what I loved about Up Close and those kinds of interview shows where you had a chance, and it really was live to tape, where we didn't do a lot of editing, but it was a true conversation like we're having. So we're not rushed for time, and even if you have to hit a break, okay, we'll continue talking about this with the sponsors. So when you have that format, I never wanted to be overly scripted, but I did want to be prepared. And you got to know something about the person right away. You got to check their mood. Sometimes they're they're very forthcoming and revealing things. And I've learned over the years that the most important thing is having a guest comfortable so that they will be revealing. And you're not, you don't have to kind of rush in and hit them hard with questions. And that you have to listen to how they respond. And often the follow-up question is where you get the better answers, I found. But yes, having a plan of what's important to cover and how you go about covering it, and making sure the guest is comfortable, but you give them a chance to explain themselves or to discuss things that are important to them. And then you follow up and take it in the direction you need to. Sometimes you need to be a little lighter. Sometimes you need to be a little serious. Sometimes somebody says, hey, I'm not comfortable talking about that. You have to respect that, but then you have to go in a different direction to still maybe address some of the things that people are interested. But I always did take into consideration not only my curiosity, but what the audience, what the viewers are thinking or wanting or expecting or needing when they tune in for the interview.
Yeah, those are great points. I always like to start off with some icebreakers before I talk to people, because like you said, if there are guards up right away, it's gonna be a little hard to get them comfortable, and then you don't get the best part of the interview until halfway through. But the people who come there with their walls breaking down, I mean, it's great.
And I think you have to be respectful of the person. Sometimes, are you dealing with a younger person who's inexperienced, an older person, a celebrity who's used to being interviewed, somebody who's kind of famous but not used to some of the questions, and they're a little bit shy about that. Those are all factors in how you approach your questions. But again, I don't think it should be like you're drilling them on site. Even if you got to get to a key question, I think there's ways to do it. And that's why a conversation, I often felt, when you have the time to do that in a podcast or in a show, versus the quick hits on the field or a quick soundbite here or there. Because I enjoy talking to people, not just famous people. And there was always something I saw in a movie. I like this line about treat the regular person like a famous guy and the famous guy like a regular person. And if you do that, it kind of balances out, because often some interviews big time like Bill Murray, big celebrities who, if you treat them like you get too hey, you're great, then you lose touch. But if you treat them like a regular guy, respectfully, I think they're more comfortable, and that's really part of the goal of the interview.
That's very true. Let's now talk about your time with Fox Sports. You've been there for 25 years now, spending time as an anchor, sideline reporter for 6 Super Bowls, and today you're currently doing play-by-play for the NFL and college football. You've done everything, and out of all of those jobs, what's been your favorite role?
Wow, there's a lot of there's the NASCAR pre-race host for the Daytona 500, which is like a Super Bowl event, doing studio shows with baseball and football. I don't know, I guess my favorite, and you hit on the interview process and the up-close show, to do an interview show was always kind of a fun thing. But as things evolve in sports, it's a quicker, faster pace. The rush of calling an NFL game or a college game, but football, NFL is what I grew up with first and foremost. So that rush of the preparation, hanging out, the practice, the video, the talking to players, coaches, your crew around you, your analyst, your camera crew, director, producer, the build up for that, and then you go to the game. It's almost like being a player, and then you don't know what's going to happen, and you have to react. It's live, it's happening. You can't. There's no second take kind of a thing. And the audience lives and dies with your calls or your lack of calls, if you want to say that. So I would say, in terms of the current roles, and I like them all, and I like being I like doing a lot of different sports, even though my passion is the NFL. That role in terms of what I'm doing at Fox is certainly one that I enjoy them all, but that jumps out the most. I pour into that probably more than anything else, because even if I wasn't doing it as a fan, I would be kind of living as close to that as I could.
Yeah, I did play-by-play for my high school football team. That was probably the most fun I've had on the mic before. One of my favorite calls of yours, though, was you were in New York for the Jets-Bucks game, and I believe it was either 2021, 2022. That's when Antonio Brown walked off the field, and like you said, you have to react to everything in real time. Your reaction was awesome. Walk me through what you were thinking and how you were planning on sharing everything you just witnessed.
Well, I mean, first we're calling a game with Tom Brady, right, as a Buccaneer, and his career is winding down. He's on the field, and we see. I thought at first it was a fan running over towards on the field. You know how fans do that type of thing, which is dangerous, and they get arrested. But he had his shirt off, and he's kind of throwing. And our field reporter said, no, I hit the key to the producer line, and producer's in my ear going, hey, we have, that's one of the Bucs on the field. And I looked and I go, I can't believe what we're seeing here, because there wasn't a build-up to it in the course of the game. We knew he was a little unhappy. There was contract talk and that type of thing. In hindsight, we found out he said some things to the coach, and the coach said, sit your butt down kind of a thing. But even Brady was, he held up with the ball like snapping it, and we're wondering what's going on. And security had to run over and get him off the field. And then even afterwards, it was an amazing story with him. So I was just trying to, and I think this always works when you have surprises like that. And again, this is TV, not radio, right? Radio, you have to over-describe in a sense. But here, you can see pictures of once we identified who it was, and none of us knew yet why he was doing it, but we're like, hey, this is live, this is happening. That's the receiver with the shirt off, team, everybody, security's going to get him, and then the game has to go on. And then when you have a moment, once you get back to the game, then this is where you have help with some research, but also you recall a few things. Hey, this particular guy, we don't know what the buildup is here, but he's had a problem with discipline or reacting with teammates or a couple of things you throw out there so people have a frame of reference. This wasn't like Tom Brady doing something like this. This was a guy who's had some issues in the past until we could figure out what this was. So describing the action and then letting the pictures tell the story, making sure you're an analyst. I think I was with Daryl Johnston at the time then. And he's the guy who played in the NFL, was on a Super Bowl team with the Cowboys. So he could be the one who's, hey, boy, no player should act like that and disrupt in the middle of the game, no matter what the issue is. It wasn't a health or medical emergency. It was a temper tantrum.
Yeah, and you said how he was unhappy, bad contract situation. Do you find that stuff out in like team meetings, like before then? And how do those meetings go? Like, are there executives there, coaches, players? What does it look like?
Yeah, in a setup for a normal game, you'll have, and since the pandemic, we have Zooms a lot. But you usually get a chance, and this is a really important part of, I think, calling a game, to meet with either in person after a practice, head coach, coordinators, and maybe the quarterback and another player or two. And there's no cameras rolling. We don't record, but they're talking to us, and we can ask questions. And usually it's related to the game, a little bit about how their season's gone. They're not going to give away any trade or state secrets here. But they'll tell us, hey, this is the plan coming in, or got a problem with this. We hope to correct this. This guy might be playing. And here, what's the mood of the team? Who's, hey, if this guy's not playing, it's probably disciplinary or because he has a nagging injury. And then we do that with the opposing team the following day. And that really gives us the insight that we have to relay carefully to the audience without violating any kind of trust from coaches or players. So the broadcast network gets that advantage, that time to prepare. And in some of that, you pick up some things and you're aware of that. And so a lot of it you don't need to use because it doesn't come into play in the game or in the situation. But in that situation with the Bucs and the receiver, it did. So, those things pay off. They're very valuable. Other than the video you watch and the notes that you read, the clippings of articles, and give writers a lot of credit during the week who cover the team because we keep up with some of that information as well.
Yeah, it makes the whole viewing experience for fans way better when the broadcasters, they know what's going on, when they know more than the fans, because that just makes the viewing experience a lot better. Is there anything else on your bucket list that you want to accomplish in this field? Because you've done it all. You've worked Super Bowls, World Series, bowl games, NASCAR races. The list goes on and on.
Yeah, one time it was the Olympics, but I don't want to say they've lost their appeal, but there's too many other important things that I think, or things that are of value on a regular basis. So I would say I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I maybe at some point I'd like to get back to doing an interview show. I mean, I know everybody has. I'm probably the only guy that doesn't have a podcast. I dabbled in it a little bit, but I think a show where kind of like in the up close format, something like that. That's either streaming or on a particular channel where athletes, coaches, players, past and present, have a chance to, and celebrities who, entertainers who are sport, would be something that I'd like to get back to and still continue to do, obviously play-by-play for football and doing the studio baseball with Fox and covering NASCAR. The pre-race is so much fun, being at the scene, at the location. The studio is one thing, but for NASCAR, it's a once-a-week big event, like a football game. And to be around the drivers, to be where it's happening, and to work with such cooperative people on the show and in the broadcast, I really enjoyed that as well.
Do you have any words of wisdom or advice to people who want to be in sports broadcasting or working towards that?
Well, I mean, the basic rule in any, and I kind of learned from my dad about, be on time, get along with people, and always do more than the job requires. Those were a few basic things that, I think I applied to schoolwork and then later when I got into broadcasting. So I think that helps everybody if you could do that. But yes, in our business, I think it's important, especially, and I love it now that there's so many opportunities or platforms, social media, whether it's podcast or X, Twitter, Instagram, however you want to, that we can see a lot of people who have opinions, who have personality, who have research, that they do things that they want to say. So I would say, be prepared as you would in any business, have a little personality. But if you enjoy what you do, keep pursuing it, because eventually you'll find some success in it. And that's kind of the thing that, if you don't get the exact path or the exact job that you want, usually there's something along the way, if you're sincere about it, that'll help lead you in that direction and close enough so that you can enjoy what you're doing in sports media or in media in general.
That's amazing. Before I let you go, is there anything else you want to speak on about your journey or interests outside broadcasting that we haven't touched on yet today?
No, I would just say that it's a great business. It's an evolving business, and you do rely on people around you, whether it be the audio guy, or the director, an editor, that type of thing, especially as you get to the network level, because the stakes are so much higher. The quality of a broadcast, the sound of a broadcast, the editing and the pictures and the stories that you do. And, I've had a lot of help along the way from some really good people that have done well at their job. So if they do their job well, I feel responsible. You're almost like the quarterback on the team. You got to do your job well. You got to, otherwise, don't fumble the ball away. Finish the drive so that everybody kind of wins and you feel better about it. But yeah, and balancing. Look, I'm a fan of sports anyway. If I wasn't working in the field, I would still be watching and listening and reacting and I've always appreciated broadcasters going back in history along the way, who paved the way for a lot of us to get to do what we do, and for the sports leagues to have grown the way they have. So I think a little gratitude goes a long way, but keep up the passion and the hustle, and those are the things I think that drive a lot of us.
Those are amazing words to live by. I really appreciate you coming on the show to share that. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to seeing you working at Fox Sports.
All right. I enjoyed it, Brooks. Thank you very much, and take care.
Yeah, you too. I'm your host, Brooks Huber, signing off until next week. Thank you for listening to the Chris Myers episode of For the Athlete.
Thanks for listening to For the Athlete. As always, be on the lookout for another athlete appearance next week. Make sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and wherever you listen to podcasts.